How's everyone doing? Awesome. All right, so we're going to dig into realizing the promise of hybrid cloud. And we had a bunch of big announcements just recently. My name, I guess, first off, before we kick this whole thing off, is Chad Kinney. I head up products and solutions. And this is Cody.
And my name is Cody Hosterman. I'm not Sandeep. I am the technical director of Pure Storage for all of our virtualization and VMware solutions. I was pondering changing this session last minute to just talking about queuing theory, because I think there could be some lessons learned there. But we made it on time.
Good stuff. All right, so quick agenda, just to give you an overview of what we're going to plan to talk about today. We'll talk a little bit about our overall cloud strategy, our thoughts around being able to enable a fully hybrid cloud environment for hybrid applications. We'll talk about how we're unifying the cloud first and foremost by looking at what we do on premises, and then move into a world of how we leverage this across on-premises private cloud with Amazon AWS. And the first part we look at here, if you just look at the enterprise cloud strategy that we've seen in most of our customer environments, they started off very much on-prem. They decided, I need to leverage some of the great services of AWS in the public cloud. And they moved on to what we believe to be a hybrid world. And we're starting to see this already. If you look at even Amazon now incorporates RDS directly in to their platform. And so you're starting to see the full hybrid cloud nature of both an on-premises and public cloud build out. We think that longer term this evolves dramatically into something that's more like hybrid applications, less just hybrid cloud services of which you leverage them separately. If you look at what we do internally, we have a very, very large Internet of Things farm. It's all of our arrays sitting out in customers' environments, and they send back telemetry data into a real data pipeline. It goes through Kafka, Spark, and various other services, as well as even platform as a service offerings within AWS. As things evolved, we started to add in our SaaS-based data from Salesforce to incorporate the user inventory so that when we created a single pane of glass platform for a user to log in, they could see all of their assets in one single pane of glass. We later decided that we wanted to run more machine learning algorithms to be able to predict issues before they occurred in the field. And by doing so, we needed to be able to leverage faster overall performance on-prem. And so we built an overall hybrid application now by putting it into a hosted environment on-prem with our FlashBlade technology, which is a scale-out object and file solution, and connect that up via Direct Connect to AWS. And so we leverage all of the facilities that we really believe that environments will slowly evolve to, leveraging all of these services. But the big challenge we found when we built this solution, and we see this a lot with customers, is you get a lot of ors. You're either on-prem, or you use SaaS, or you use kind of infrastructure as a service type offerings, or even edge-based solutions. We think that the strategy is more around and. You need to be able to leverage all of these solutions together. We see from research, 451 research, as looking at the customer responses around this, people are looking to leverage hybrid IT. 58% of the respondents here said that they wanted to leverage some sort of hybrid nature within their application stack. A lot of people wanted to be able to use more public cloud innovations versus utilizing the existing stuff only on-prem. But today, the cloud divide that exists today makes it very difficult for you to merge these two worlds together. The on-prem and hosted environment is all about packaged apps, very siloed infrastructure. Whereas the public cloud is very much about scale-out services and platform as a service offerings that you can leverage as part of your stack. We also see very, very different consumption models behind this. Most of it's CapEx oriented. You buy a single array that's kind of depreciated over time. And it's very, very manual typically on-prem, whereas in the public cloud, it's API everything. It's super simple to deploy, and it's consume and pay for what you consume as you continue to grow. On the on-prem side, you look at leveraging dedicated storage arrays with great resiliency factors, with rich software features that sit on top. And in the public cloud, it's a much more simple, scalable storage model. And so we think that the data tier is actually the model that breaks this world apart more than anything else. And if you were to have common data services with seamless orchestration across the stack, giving you bidirectional application mobility between on-premises and the public cloud with AWS, you would see a more hybrid way of deploying infrastructure. And the reason why data is important to be the bridge between the two is it enables much more application compatibility. You can leverage the exact same APIs and developers can now leverage those APIs across both the on-premises and the cloud world. It enables you much more agility to move data from any of these worlds and be able to process where you need it to be processed versus it being kind of stuck in a silo in one of the sides of the house. It also enables much better innovation because now you don't have to learn two different sets of tools. This bridge enables a lot of great ways for developers to be able to develop faster without having to be able to have to learn different worlds out there. We also believe that a very data-centric architecture is vastly important for this type of world. It needs to be fast, shared, and be able to have it be highly secure, on demand, and globally available for you. And also hybrid by design. You should be able to leverage these technologies in multiple different areas, and as they evolve from a technology stack, be able to actually evolve with it without having to repurchase the same thing over and over again. So if you look at the way that we unify cloud, we really break it down into three main core tenets. The first one is build your cloud. This is all about building a private cloud on premises to be able to leverage all of the great flexibility of automation, orchestration, and simplicity within the environment. Run anywhere is the second tenet, which is all about bridging the gap between those two worlds. The last part is protecting data everywhere, which will look at backup just as a whole and fix the fundamental issue of not being able to restore data fast enough for most of the SLAs within the enterprise. Cody, why don't you go ahead and kick off the Build Your Cloud section?
Thanks, Chad. I'll take the thing. Yeah, so I don't know, about 6 or 7 years ago, I wrote a white paper implementation guide thing about building a hybrid cloud, right? And frankly, it was nonsense. The technologies, the foundational technologies from a storage perspective, from the connectivity up the stack, it wasn't there yet. Right? And I think we finally got to a point here where this technology exists in the foundational core pieces of the storage arrays of the public cloud section, the connectivity between them there is actually finally there, right? And so what we've done is taken the storage and features and resiliency and so forth that you have on premises, right? And allowed you to use those same technologies that you use on premises to manage it also in the public cloud, right? AWS, right? So whether you're using Kubernetes, whether you're using the vRealize stack from VMware, whether you just custom Python, right? Whether you're using VMware, right? Whether your OS is Microsoft, is Windows, right? You can use the same storage features, the snapshots, the restores, the clustered file systems and whatnot that you're using on premises. So it does make it easier to move those applications, right, into the public cloud or move them back or wherever they want to go. Because what Chad said is true, right? Are 100% of all customers going to move to 100% public? No. Are 100% going to stay on premises? Absolutely not, right? The majority are going to be somewhere in the middle using both. Right? And making it easier for especially even smaller scale companies that don't have the time to rewrite all their applications to be able to move those things in there is really important. And so what we're trying to do from the data layer is allow you to use the tools that you use today, right, and not have to even change them just because the application is running somewhere else. Right? And I think that's an important part of this, right? And that's where comes our features around our storage array as well. Right? What you use on premises, whether it's iSCSI, whether it's vVols and VMware environments, right? Whether it's snapshots, whether it's array-based replication, asynchronous or synchronous or active-active rather, you can take those and get those same benefits, the availability, the restorability, right? And the workflows and tools you use to do that in the public cloud, right? And one of the things we also offer on the on-premises side of it, I'm making sure not to say on-premise. If I get caught there, let me know. On the on-premises side, now I'm going to psych myself out, with S3 offerings internally, right? Our FlashBlade product offers you to build those kind of web-scale applications on-premises using the S3 on FlashBlade, but then also, of course, you could do the same thing inside of AWS using their S3 offering, right? And so there's a lot of flexibility. Because what we don't want to do as a company is we don't want to lock your data into a specific hypervisor, right? A specific physical location, even a physical array, or even us, right? We understand that data is going to move here, there, or whatnot. So we want to provide the tools to leverage us, Pure, right, where it needs to be, but also be able to move data somewhere else if need be, right? That flexibility, I think, is far more important in the long run for us to build than to try to lock you into our solutions and technology, right? That flexibility is particularly important. And then also, like Chad referred to earlier, right, is the consumption model, how it gets paid for, right? Technologies, tools, I mean, even just consumer products, right? They're moving towards a more subscription-based mechanism, right? What you're actually using is what you're paying for, right? And that's what we're offering with our storage offerings too, is not to pre-buy this big storage array where you have to pay for all the capacity, whether you need it now or not, is pay as you go and as you actually use it, right? But leveraging our internal tools, our data reduction, compression, dedupe, right, to shrink that footprint, right? Providing some efficiencies there. Take it away, Chad.
All right. Next core tenet is run anywhere. And that's really focused on bridging this gap. We've put some new services out there called Cloud Data Services, which incorporates really three main technologies. And you'll see the first one, which is Cloud Block Store, which is leveraging our Purity software in AWS. You'll also see Cloud Snap, which is taking our snapshot technology and enabling you to leverage S3 in the cloud within AWS to be able to actually store data, protect your data sets, whether it be for compliance, for backup, or DR. And then you also see Store Reduce, which is a recent acquisition of ours, which was a backup software for deduplication on S3 for cloud-native applications, but we'll also be leveraging that from an on-premises perspective as well. On top of all of this, if you're not familiar with Pure, is Pure One. That was that hybrid application that I talked about earlier. This is taking telemetry data from our arrays. It happens about every 30 seconds. These arrays send back telemetry data to us. We then created an app that allows you to visualize in the cloud what your environment looks like and see all of your arrays, performance results, historical, as well as real-time information about your arrays. And then on the bottom is the Purity operating environment or Purity storage software that kind of bridges the two, as we've talked about between these. What Cloud Block Store for AWS is, it's an industrial strength solution for block storage in AWS. It gives you high levels of reliability, high efficiencies, as well as enabling this whole hybrid cloud world that we talked about for data mobility. We also use the same APIs for both of these environments. And so you can take all of the workflows that you'd previously built into your guys' environment and be able to leverage it across both of these worlds. What Cloud Block Store for AWS is, digging in a little bit deeper, we optimized the Purity operating environment that runs today on top of our own hardware and optimized it for AWS. This allowed us to not only be able to spin up these things quickly, but we optimized it for all sorts of new rich software feature sets that enable cloud to become even more enhanced. And what's cool about this is you can spin these things up relatively quickly via cloud formation templates, and Cody can dig into a little bit deeper into that. But also we add in a bunch of efficiency technology on top of the actual block storage device, including dedupe at fine-grained granularity, compression, and also encryption of all data at rest, as well as thin provisioning. And so you get all of these inherent efficiencies to reduce the overall storage footprint that's out there today. We also make it highly reliable, so you can go and do an active cluster, which we have an active-active model across availability zones, even across regions, which of course are across availability zones as well. You can enable hybrid architectures where you can leverage our bidirectional replication from on-prem to the public cloud within AWS and be able to restore environments to Cloud Block Store natively, if you'd like to, with our Cloud Snap technology. It's also very flexible. So when we talked about the consumption models that we've built on premises, we are now leveraging very similar types of consumption models in AWS as well. You want to talk a little bit about kind of spinning up an instance?
Yeah, absolutely. So quick show of hands. Who is, in general, with AWS tools, who has used CloudFormation templates for applications today? Right, fair amount, right? Half the room, maybe more, right? And that's what we've seen too, right? It's a very useful tool for deploying applications or larger distributed applications as well. And so that's what we went with for Cloud Block Store, right? Is that it's a CloudFormations template that you can then use to deploy directly inside of AWS tools or using your orchestrator, right? There's a lot of APIs around CloudFormations, whether you're a PowerShell user, right? Whether you're Python, whether you want to directly use the API. Some of the, in our booth, if you want to check it out, we have some demos around different ways of deploying it. One of the focuses are, I'm our VMware person, right? So a lot of the demos that I built around using the vRealize suite, vRealize automation, right? vRealize orchestrator to build these out, right? vRealize orchestrator has a AWS plugin that has pretty much the full functionality that you need to deploy this type of stuff. So what we wanted to do is make it very simple to quickly deploy. Right? Not even just for production use cases. Hey, maybe I just want to test some scripts, right? Maybe I want to use the REST API that the storage appliance offers, right? Test it, figure it out, provision my storage, how do I do replication, DR, right? And then spin it back down, right? And so it can sit there and run for a while, right? Using active-active replication, providing resiliency, or something you can spin up real quick, right? Do what you need to do, and then spin it back down, right? Because one of the important things around using public cloud is it offers elasticity, right? I need the resources, I don't need it now, I'm not paying for what I'm not using. And so it's built in the same way where you can quickly and easily deploy it, right? And it's licensed through our Pure 1 interface, so you can just spin up a key, deploy it, right? And it's all through the APIs, right? So it's a simple mechanism to actually do that. Right? And another kind of point, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, is who here is interested in using VMware Cloud on AWS, or who is using it today? Using it today, a few. Who is interested? I guess I should ask it in 2 different orders. Right. Yeah, and that's something that we see a lot of value in. I'm working with VMware very closely on building out the storage roadmap around VMware Cloud on AWS. Right? If you can actually go to VMware's site and it shows you their public roadmap, right, for VMC, which I think is really cool. And one of the things that's listed there is, of course, block storage support. Right? A huge amount of their on-premises customers, right, use block storage, whether that's Fiber Channel, whether it's iSCSI, right? NVMe over Fabrics is starting to move that way too. And so VMware says, yeah, there's a really interesting use case around that. Right? DR as a service is a big one. Right? Hey, I don't want to pay for an entire another data center for my DR, but I want to be able to spin it up real quickly. But what's important is already having the data there. Right? So I can spin up VMC. The data's already ready, mounts the VMFS or vVols, right, that type of stuff, and spins up your VM. So this is something that we're working very closely along with VMware. And this is why Cloud Block Store, right, we find is really strategically important moving forward, to provide you with that option if that's something that you want to do. And so our close partnership with VMware continues around AWS. Right? It's certainly not going to slow. And the nice thing about that too, right, I mean, many of you get that, right, that use VMware on premises, as you raise your hands, right, is that we have an investment on products and manage our VMware environment. Right? But we want to move to public cloud, so we see some value in not only the people that understand that technology, but the tools we've paid for to use and understand today. Right? And so that's a big focus for us moving forward. Right? And so internally inside of AWS right now, the way Cloud Block Store works is iSCSI volumes. Right? So whether it's to EC2 instances or even inside of VMs, right, you can mount that storage via guest iSCSI, but something like NVMe over Fabrics, right, via Rocky V2, right, or other possibly TCP. Anyone actually implementing NVMe over Fabrics today in their on-premises environment? Anyone looking at it? Probably the wrong crowd to ask around that, but I was just kind of curious, right? So that's something that we're looking at implementing inside of Cloud Block Store at AWS as well, because it reduces latency, because of the efficiencies natively that comes with NVMe over Fabrics. Yeah.
Awesome. One of the other big benefits of having the data layer of things be common across both platforms is it allows you to be able to move enterprise applications much more easily versus having to re-architect them for the resiliency of how AWS is laid out. Now, if you look at our world, we built our software to deal with the inherent reliabilities of hardware on premises. We've done now the exact same thing on the infrastructure of AWS and enabled the enhancements of cloud storage through a bunch of different cool things. For one, we run multiple EBS volumes behind this Cloud Block Store internally within the system, and this aggregates the overall performance just as a whole behind that one Cloud Block Store. We also, for applications that need to be kind of mirrored across availability zones, can enable active cluster across an availability zone and have your host be able to have access to both sides of it. So if there were ever any sort of issues on one availability zone, you could easily spin up an environment on the secondary side, or actually have that secondary side have full access to it in an active-active architecture. We also built in a bunch of efficiencies, as I mentioned before, with dedupe, compression, thin provisioning. So it reduces the overall data set that you store within AWS as well. But it also gives you all of the layered feature sets. So our snapshot technology is pretty awesome. We enable you to be able to take snapshots on any volume. You can override any volume with a snapshot. And so you get some really cool use cases for, let's say, a database environment where you want to snapshot that database. You want to refresh, let's say, a test dev environment off production. You can easily then go overwrite production with today's or the last hour's production data to test dev. Leveraging these highly efficient snapshots that don't take any additional space other than the deltas, which are also deduped and compressed against the global population, create some really cool workflows, especially around test dev environments or even development environments where you want to spin up 30, 40 instances of the exact same thing.
And I think that's a really key point, right? So one of the, I know I keep polling people, but who's a Pure customer today? There's a few out there. Oh, great, awesome. One of the core parts about our operating environment runs in our storage array on premises, right, is that it's all metadata based, right? So you write data in, we do our dedupe, our compression, we put the blocks wherever, and our volumes, our storage objects, devices, disks, whatever you want to call them, right, are just a bunch of metadata pointers, right? And so when we're snapshotting that, all we're doing is taking that metadata, small amount of data, and presenting it to another object, right? And so we can create these snapshots instantaneously. And the key part about how it's architected, right, is that it doesn't really matter what's below it, right? We've changed mediums a couple times, right? We started off with SSDs, now we're using flash modules, right? But in the end, it doesn't really make a difference, right? And so, a year and a half ago, we thought about this and we started looking at public cloud and we're like, well, do we have to create some kind of new tool, new offering that's specific for it? And we're like, in the end, our operating environment essentially runs in Linux, right? And then it has some storage, and then we have some customization around how we should use that medium, right? We do a lot of cool stuff around how Flash works and stuff. But we didn't have to rewrite the entire operating environment. We're just like, oh, well, now it's a new medium. We present up through in the back end of our Cloud Block Store implementation, and then we still can apply all the same techniques we used before. Right, the features that we use on premises, right? So snapshotting, active replication, async, and so forth. You can get those same benefits in the public cloud. You can do it very fast, right? So it's easy to automate because you don't have to write a big loop just to wait for it to finish, right? It finishes when the API operation is requested, right?
Great points. The last part to this is all of our data is encrypted at rest. We use an AES 256 encryption algorithm that all data at rest, whether it's on premises or actually in AWS, is fully encrypted at rest. So if you look at how we deliver a hybrid cloud across all of these different technologies, I know there's a lot to look at on this slide, but customers love to have various different options for different SLAs. And so if you look at the first big use case, Cody talked about already, is DR. People don't want to go have a secondary data center or maybe even a third data center to go replicate to. You can leverage Cloud Block Store as a replication target and have it available to be able to spin up some EC2 instances and be up and running relatively quickly without having to have that secondary site up and running. You can migrate to the cloud leveraging our asynchronous replication solution and be able to move data from on-premises to Cloud Block Store in AWS. But you could also go and back up to the cloud leveraging Cloud Block Store, which takes those same highly efficient snapshots we talked about previously and sends these in a portable way. Our portable snapshots takes the blob of data and applies, has metadata associated to it as well, so that any Flash array on premises or Cloud Block Store in the public cloud can go look at it and say, oh, I know exactly what it is. It shows up as a listing of where that snapshot is. It's where it came from. And you can restore it to any Flash array on premises or restore it to a Cloud Block Store in AWS. The last part here is giving you HA even within the cloud itself, leveraging Active Cluster, which is our active synchronous replication solution between the two availability zones. This gives you even more resiliency, but also brings in some new use cases that today aren't available. Can I go into any deeper on that?
Yeah. So it goes back to the point I made before, right? Is that disaster recovery as a service and so forth is a really interesting opportunity around this, right? Where I can move my VMs, I can move my entire applications using the array-based replication that I use today, right? One of the key tools around that is, of course, VMware Site Recovery Manager. I'm going to keep going back to VMware use cases. Like I said, I'm the VMware person, right? But the variety of the tools around that. And that gives you some nice benefits around managing that without having to manage and own your own DR data center if you want to. And VMware Cloud is an important part about that. And, am I pitching VMware Cloud today, or am I doing Pure? I don't know. But one kind of interesting story around VMware Cloud that kind of really opened my eyes a little bit to some of the flexibility that it offers. And of course, this can be built on premises too, right? But there's some nice built-in functionality around how this works. I was spinning a demo up for this conference actually a couple weeks ago at VMware's conference in Barcelona. And I tried to connect to my lab, but I had to go through this jump box back in California, and latency was horrible. I couldn't record it. And then I realized, well, this is actually running in AWS. I don't need to go back to my jump backs on-premise. So I went into VMware Cloud, created a firewall rule so I could actually have the public IP of that hotel allow my RDP session into my VMC instance. So if you happen to be in the Meridian in Barcelona, you can do a nice denial of the service attack on my Windows box. But there's some cool flexibility around that, right? I wouldn't recommend maybe doing that, but it kind of exemplifies the flexibility, and that's really kind of, it clicked a little bit for me. It's like there's some really cool stuff you can do around this, around the flexibility of not just network access and application availability, but just moving your data in and out, right? And that's a key part of what we're trying to do here.
One other area that we see quite a bit with DR sites is they don't usually have a bunch of hosts that are sitting there to be able to spin up new features or new things within the business. In this example, a lot of folks would use this for analytics. I want to spin up a bunch of compute to actually run an analytics environment in AWS, where I may not have that in a traditional DR target. And so you truly get to leverage the data sets versus it just being kind of a secondary array that's really not doing much other than sitting there waiting for a disaster to occur to spin up on. If you look at what we've done from a management and orchestration side of things, Pure One gives us the ability to monitor all of your assets from Pure Storage, whether it's on premises or actually in AWS. It allows you that consistent APIs where it's 100% REST API that we've built out with Python libraries for your developers to be able to create their own automations and workflows. We have a great PowerShell toolkit that's been developed with a bunch of different commandlets that have been built out. We built in plugins into VMware, as well as created some automation within AWS and on premises that Cody can talk more about, or you can check out his blog to get more details on. And then we built in all of these full stack integrations. Pure Storage Orchestrator, as an example, takes a very container-based solution and allows you to be able to create policies for your developers instead of them accessing the actual infrastructure directly, abstracting that away and making it so that you can move the storage on the back end, whether it be on premises or in AWS as well. All right, the last section here is the protect everywhere. Now, when we looked at backup's an interesting space. No one likes to talk about it. It's the least sexy thing that is in IT. But it is one of the bigger pains that we see out there. Most people today don't have a backup problem per se. They mostly have a restore problem. And the reason being is that it wasn't optimized to restore data relatively quickly. It was optimized to get data as fast as possible into that single device. The old world that you mostly see today is disk to tape. You kind of go with your traditional deduplication disk target. Maybe you replicate to another disk target, and then maybe you send it off into tape. Or your deduplication maybe on the primary and then going to disk and then to tape. But at the end of the day, there's some pretty big downsides to doing that. For one, you can't restore very fast. Two, tape really gets you no value other than the insurance of having it out there. There's no way to spin anything up to utilize that data set. What we looked at is, what if we could change the game and go flash to cloud and leverage the economics of AWS to be able to offset the cost basis of running a backup target to flash. Now, the reason why flash as a backup target is an interesting one is you get faster recoveries, typically about 10x of what you're going to see in a normal environment. You have better efficiencies because we can incorporate much better rich feature sets for deduplication and compression and be able to restore fast back without having to kind of recreate the data in a slow fashion within disk. That transactional nature is very slow. It's much more durable than the very fragile tapes that may be stuck in a vault somewhere that you may or may not even have the hardware for when you actually need to pull it back. And you can actually utilize the data set if your longer term backups are actually sitting in Amazon directly, so that in AWS you could spin up services to actually be able to run analytics on top of those backups or even do recovery of data for compliance reasons. We believe tomorrow you should be able to leverage a flash to cloud world. And the technologies that we're doing behind it, first and foremost, is our snapshot technology can be leveraged off of a flash array on premises to a flash blade. And you can keep many, many instances of those backups for any of your volumes that you have out there with our portable snapshot technology. You can also send a cloud snap to AWS directly and keep a longer term retention out there as well. But we've also now incorporated Store Reduce, which will be, it's starting its public beta as of last week, which we're going to then be able to leverage an on-premises S3 deduplication instance within StoreReduce, store that data into FlashBlade locally, and then longer term tier off the data for longer term retention into AWS. This allows you to offset the economics, and we believe we can deliver cost parity between these solutions and give you much better results, including faster recovery, more flexible recovery on where you actually pull from, whether it be in the public cloud or whether it be on premises, and a much simpler, much more efficient way of doing backup just as a whole. The first big one that we talked about a little bit already is CloudSnap. What's cool about CloudSnap is you can send it just off to an S3 target within AWS, and you can keep as many instances as you want of that particular instance. This gives you long-term retention. It's simple and easy because it's already pre-built into the Purity operating system running on the flash array. It's very, very quick because we're only sending deltas out that are fully compressed before it's sent to the cloud. And when you restore that data, it's metadata aware to make sure that it's not restoring data blocks that are already on that flash array as a whole. So you get highly efficient restorations at the exact same time. And with Cloud Block Store, you can actually recover in the cloud versus having to go all the way back to your on-premises instance.
Right, and this goes back to the point I made earlier, right, is that one of the goals here is unlocking your applications and your data, right? So Cloud Block Store kind of unlocks, hey, do I want it to be on-premises, do I want it to be in AWS, right? But I don't want to change the top, so you can still use what you want to use, right? CloudSnap allows you to, hey, I don't even maybe want it on this Pure Storage flash array. I need to put it in S3 and then convert it to an EBS object or something like that, right? So this opens up that flexibility. You actually move the data completely somewhere else if you want to, or pull it back to a different array as needed, right? So this is another key part of that flexibility.
The next big innovation that we've released as part of this is StoreReduce, which was an acquisition that we did a quarter ago, which takes it's a deduplication engine that sits on top of S3. So it consumes S3 as well as deduplicates the data, then dumps it to an S3 target. This can be leveraged both on premises with FlashBlade, as well as in AWS natively on top of S3. It gives you abilities to scale out to almost infinite sizes, hundreds of petabytes, and actually be able to leverage this to restore relatively quickly, whether it be on premises or in the cloud. And it allows you to leverage this whole hybrid world of being able to have some of your capacity. Let's say if 90% or 99% of your restores come in the first 45 days, you can have a flash cache on premises that only holds 45 days on FlashBlade and then actually tiers off to AWS afterwards. Leveraging that economics is what allows you to have that super fast recovery without having to pay for an all-flash backup environment.
So there's something that really bothers me about that slide.
What is it?
So the whole point of StoreReduce is, right, deduplication, right? The two R's right next to one another should be deduped, but beyond that. Anyway, so I said I was a last-minute ad, so we basically said, hey, can you just do color commentary throughout the session? So ignore
You're doing great. All right, so this is showing you kind of the full hybrid cloud world. I don't want to reiterate all of the same exact stuff again, but Cloud Block Store, CloudSnap, and StoreReduce enables this fully hybrid world that we talked about previously at the intro of things. So you can truly deploy hybrid applications and be able to leverage data, whether it's on premises or in the public cloud with AWS, and be able to really not have any sort of limitations on where things are deployed, nor have any sort of changes to the way that your workflows work today on premises versus in the public cloud. All right, so one other session, if you guys are interested, we're doing on Wednesday the 28th. It's a deeper dive into the flash to cloud story with StoreReduce, and we'd love to see you guys over there. I think we have time for questions, if there are any out there.
And please do stop by the booth if you want to see deeper demos of these technologies, how they actually work, and talk to our engineers and architects around how we've built it and implemented it. Certainly stop by the booth. But yes, questions now.
So for the CBS, are you using only the EBS as an underlying storage, or use several S3?
Yeah, so our current beta of it right now is actually using EBS, but we're moving that to S3. So by the time it's going to be released, it's going to be an S3 backend.
And for everything, including the high performance tier, everything with S3?
So we have a couple different tiers. So we run an NVRAM device which backs DRAM. So when writes come in, we actually mirror to two NVRAM devices. Those are on IO1, lower latency volumes. But for the rest of the stuff, it's all GP2 on the back for the beta. We'll, over time, evolve this so that you'll have storage instances that then become stored back into an S3 target to give you higher resilience on the back end.
The key point of it too, right, is that we've and by the way, the question for the camera, in case it wasn't heard, was what are we backing Cloud Block Store with? The key point here is that as AWS introduces new technologies and new offerings internally, we can leverage that directly inside of Cloud Block Store without you having to make any changes to your environment, right? And so we've designed it to be efficient so we can do that work, and you can just continue using the same APIs, the same volumes we've always done, and we just make it better in the back end. It's very similar just as we upgrade our hardware that we sell on premises, right? As new technologies, as new types of flash come in, as new whatevers, right? We can just plug it into the back end, and you benefit without really having to do anything other than replace the hardware or upgrade it.
Yep.
What's the difference between this product and the storage gateway?
Storage gateway for which storage gateway?
Amazon storage gateway.
I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. Do you know?
I mean, fundamentally, these things achieve similar ends, right? The main difference is that what we can offer inside of our Purity operating environment, right? Around a lot of the feature sets and the replication and the active-active replication, the data reduction and that type of stuff. So it's very similar and I'm not an expert on the storage gateway, so obviously I'm just talking from a fairly high level here. But in the end, it's very much like any storage platform, right? What do? They store your zeros and ones, right? What they do internally is where the real value comes from. And that's what we're trying to do is take the value that we offer our customers currently. And there's plenty of them in here that you could certainly talk to and ask. But it's really us trying to bring that value and that simplicity of provisioning into AWS, right?
And it's all,
storage stack.
If you look at that whole data tier, it functionally giving you the same workflows that you have on premises just makes it easier for people to take enterprise apps that exist today on Pure Storage and move them into the public cloud. But we're also seeing people leverage this technology, at least from the beta side of things, on just traditional cloud native applications that they've built just to add in some new features that they don't currently have today within AWS. Good question. Yeah.
So how do you actually spin up an EC2 instance running off of Cloud Block?
So if you want to spin up an EC2 instance, so that's a good question. So right now, we're investigating how we can do the boot and so forth, but a lot of it is focused on the data volumes, right? So you spin up an EC2 instance, right, it's running Windows or running Linux or the Oracle database or SQL, and then we present the database itself volume directly into EC2 via iSCSI. But that is something we're looking for more options around. Can we boot off? Does it make sense to do that, right? Is there value around it? And that's why I think VMware Cloud is going to be a really interesting use case on there, because we just boot off VMFS or boot off vVols inside of it, just like you do on premises. But that's how it works today.
Good question.
Personally, it's really exciting for me because I'll say it again, I'm the VMware person, right? But I've been working on AWS stuff for not long. 2 months, right? Something like that. And it's been interesting to learn these different things and different options and how quickly it's evolving. So it's been a lot of fun for me personally. And so these things are going to only expand. Yes? Yep.
How do you address the low latency requirements in the cloud?
I'll let you take that one.
How do we address low latency requirements? So there's an aggregation of performance just with all the EBS volumes behind it in the current beta. So you actually see a performance gain at the larger scale systems. And so we're planning to size these into 3 different kind of sets or more. And so as you increase the sizes of things, you either have a performance optimized system or you have a capacity optimized system. And that's just based upon the ES2 instances inside that we build within the Cloud Block Store. Low latency, though, is from an application stack. The way we buffer our IOs is very different. You're not actually writing directly to, let's say, an EBS volume itself. We actually write data and then mirror it to 2 NVRAM devices, which are those IO1 low latency volumes. And then we acknowledge back to the host that we've received the data. Then we asynchronously go through data reduction and all the other things before we stripe the data down to the EBS volume. And so we can achieve very, very low latency because 1, we aggregate the EBS volumes for reads to be faster, and 2, for writes, they're buffered through the IO1 volumes that are lower latency access. Yeah?
When we're talking about the VMware AWS,
Yeah.
I guess their VM using their own VCL. So what's the Pure's position there? Are you at the backend storage for the VCL, or do you put it separate?
Yeah, it's separate right now. So you have two options with vSAN inside of VMware Cloud today. There's the internal storage, right? And then they also support EBS-backed vSAN, which is something they just recently announced. We're not going to be, I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard VMware talking about doing that. I think what VMware, no, I know what VMware is moving forward to is external storage that's VMFS or vVol-based, not vSAN. So they want to run it alongside one another is kind of the plan. Probably moving, if this is all non-GA stuff, but it is on their public roadmap, right, is probably have the compute cluster, right, where you, or the management rather cluster running on vSAN, right, because that just gets deployed when the VMC gets deployed. But then as you move your VMs in, that's running off VMFS on Cloud Block Store or whatnot, because it goes back to the importance of something like DR as a service, where I need that data to be there ready. And with vSAN, that compute has to be there first, which you don't want to be paying for to sit around. And so that's where the compute cluster comes in, brings in the Cloud Block Store storage, right? So it will most likely be a hybrid model. I don't think they'll plan on booting their management VMs and so forth off external storage, because there's some, you know, chicken the egg kind of situations going on there. But that's the plan moving forward. Correct. We'll have our own data stores for VMs that you'll have then permissions to be able to provision off of and so forth inside of it.
Yeah, so one of the challenges, we're looking at VMware AWS as well, but one of the challenges is that you have to have a bunch of nodes to be able to replicate that data.
Yep.
Maybe your solution just stores the data and only have a few nodes for compute, so we actually need to be honest.
Exactly, few or none, right? And that's exactly what we're working on with them, because VMware sees customers with that exact same question, and so do we, and that's going to be a major use case for us. But good to hear that we're not making it up.
Yep. Can it mitigate the costs, meaning that you don't have an egress charge back? And so what you would do is you would optimize the scenario where your on-premises would have the majority of your restorations come about. So reduce over time. You can use the cloud as just a main target, but you effectively are still pulling back the full data set. There is some optimizations that we can build into it with compression and understanding what's actually on-prem versus not on-prem. But really, I think the model here is that you would cache the amount of data locally for what you typically restore from, and then if you had to go back into longer term, you would effectively pay the egress charges for that.
Yeah, and we're looking at implementing that technology in a variety of ways. But at least like today with the Cloud Block Store and on-premises flash array, we can reduce egress charges because we do preserve our dedupe and compression back. Even if there's zero on-premises, right, we can still internally of that workload preserve the dedupe and compression of it, because obviously the target understands how to expand it, right? And so that can help with that costs as well. So it's like these are all technologies, and Store Reduces, that's one of the reasons that we bought that technology, is we see some advantages around some of the dedupe they can further offer on top of that, right?
Other questions? Yep.
So if you were actually going to log into the S3 bucket that's behind it, can we just see like blob, dedupe blob objects? Basically?
Yes, you would access it via Store Reduce directly. Questions? Oh.
You may have answered this already, but did you leverage these tools to do migrations of, say, databases to the cloud? Is that part of that?
Yeah. I mean, actually, that's exactly what like half the demos that we have at our booth are, is removing SQL databases, Oracle workloads, right? And I think the new announcements around VMware Cloud, RDS, and just general RDS too, should be interesting solutions that we can build around moving databases with that too. But yeah, our demos are focused around that. So if you want more detail, we have some of our Oracle and Microsoft people at the booth that can go into more detail on what they've done and show you how it works.
No, you can replicate with the storage level as well. So you can do bidirectional replication to a Cloud Block Store in the cloud. You could also replicate a snapshot via Cloud Snap to an S3 target and then restore it back to Cloud Block Store in the cloud as well. So you can have a bunch of different ways of doing it. The options are great. All right, anything else? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time. They're great questions.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much.